Howdy, folks. Mr. Reardon here. I'd like to walk you through the second part of our grammar and punctuation unit, which is called Using Sentence Patterns to Punctuate. In the last video, or if you're in my class in the previous lesson, we went over 7 grammar terms, and you had a lot of opportunity to practice practice recognizing these grammar terms in English sentences. So you learned the independent clause, dependent clause, coordinating conjunction, independent clause marker, dependent clause marker, independent clause marker, essential element, and non-essential element. So the purpose of you learning to identify all of these different things in English sentences was to help you more easily see patterns of all these grammatical pieces in sentences in English. So the fact is that the placement of these 7 pieces in sentences can help you to determine with certainty where it is that you're supposed to put commas and semicolons. This will cover probably 80% of the appearances of commas and semicolons in writing in English. And so if you know just these terms and the patterns that we're about to go over, then you will be able to punctuate about 80% of your day-to-day sentences correctly. You'll also be able to recognize sentences that are punctuated incorrectly. It's so important for you to be able to use commas and semicolons correctly if you have any desire to write successfully in any kind of academic environment, especially after high school. So community college or a 4-year college. Plus, you're going to be doing a lot of writing across your classes in high school, whether you're a junior watching this in the fall or a freshman watching it in the spring. You still have quite a bit of writing ahead of you, even in high school. And so you need to, this will be very helpful for you. So in the presentation, we're going to walk through the 8 most common sentence patterns in English. You will then have a chance to practice recognizing these patterns and using the existence of the patterns to punctuate unpunctuated sentences correctly. So the first pattern is just one independent clause with no punctuation needed. So we will represent this with just IC, right? So an independent clause, like what you learned before. Here's an example. California is the most populous state in the United States. The second pattern is one independent clause followed by one dependent clause with no punctuation needed. So if you have 2 clauses in a row in English with the independent clause first and the dependent clause after it, you do not need to add a comma or a semicolon or anything. This is the rule. So you can say the Bay Area is slowly losing residents, even though it is a great place to live. Because you have the DC, the Bay Area is slowly losing residents first, and then you have the IC first, and then you have the DC after it, even though it is a great place to live. That is because you have that structure, you don't need to add any additional punctuation. The third pattern is one dependent clause followed by one independent clause with a comma between them. So while in English you can do the independent clause first and then follow it with a dependent clause, and you don't need a comma, if you reverse the order, then all of a sudden a comma is required. This is one of the most important comma rules in English. So here's an example. When the storms came through last year, the wind shut off the power in Palo Alto for several hours. Right, so because I decided to put the dependent clause starting with when first in this example, and then put the independent clause after it, now a comma is required. If I were to reorder the sentence, I really wouldn't change its meaning at all. I could say the wind shut off the power in Palo Alto for several hours when the storms came through last year. right? I would no longer need a comma if I decided to order the ideas in that way. But because I put the DC first and then followed it by the IC, a comma after year was required. Fourth pattern you need to be able to recognize is two independent clauses with a semicolon between them. Here's an example. A large amount of rain is good for the local plants. Heavy storms also help to ensure Californians have enough drinking water in their reservoirs. So what you end up with here is two totally independent clauses. Either thing on or either of the things on the to the left and right of the semicolon could be sentences by themselves. A large amount of rain is good for the local plants. You could put a period there and it would be a complete sentence. Or heavy storms also help to ensure Californians have enough drinking water in their reservoirs. That is a complete sentence by itself. The fact that there's an also here and you wouldn't know what it is in addition to doesn't matter grammatically. It is still a complete sentence. So if you were to put a comma here instead of a semicolon, we would call that a comma splice, and it would be incorrect in English. And so this is one of the most common errors that ninth grade students make in their writing, and it absolutely needs to be avoided. There are a lot of ways to combine any two independent clauses, and this is just one of them. Several of the other patterns we'll look at will also help you to do this same thing. That is, join two independent clauses together without just using a comma, without making the pretty egregious comma splice error. The fifth pattern you need to know is two independent clauses joined by a comma and a coordinating conjunction. So we'll represent this IC, CC, IC. Note where the comma is there. You have put a comma after the first independent clause and before the coordinating conjunction, not after it. So here's an example. The Lexington Reservoir filled nearly to capacity, comma, but Lake Kachuma's levels hardly changed. So there's a but there. The but, of course, is the B in fanboys. It is a coordinating conjunction. I would expect that you could recognize that but's a coordinating conjunction and then recognize that it is this pattern if you were to come across this sentence, and then place that comma there. Pattern 6 is two independent clauses joined by a semicolon, an independent clause marker, and a comma. So it's this pattern. IC, semicolon, ICM, comma, IC. Example. Lightning rods were struck in Santa Cruz. However, there was no danger from lightning in Palo Alto. Note here you have an independent clause starting with lightning and ending with Cruz, then a semicolon, then however, which is the H, that's Herbert in the Noisy Turtle list, then a comma, then you have a second independent clause. There was no danger from lightning in Palo Alto. So this is yet another way you can join two independent clauses together. Pattern 7 is an independent clause containing an essential element and no additional punctuation. So if you put an element that is essential to the sentence within a single independent clause, often starting with something like whoever or whichever, then you don't need to add any punctuation to that. So Maria will give whoever finds her water bottle $5. I would expect you could recognize that whoever finds her water bottle in this sentence is the essential element, and therefore the pattern is IEEC, and you do not need any punctuation. Pattern 8 is an independent clause containing a non-essential element surrounded by two commas. So I, comma, NEEC. Let me restate that. I, comma, NEE, comma, C. So an example, the water bottle, which was a gift from her father, has a great deal of sentimental value. You could take this piece out here and say the water bottle has a great deal of sentimental value. The The non-essential element in here just helps to give a little more information about the water bottle, and also maybe a little bit helps to explain the rest of the sentence. That is that why it has sentimental value. But you can take that out and it doesn't change the basic idea being conveyed, which is that the water bottle has sentimental value. All right, so now we're going to do some check for understanding, very much like the first video. I will show you a sentence, and all you need to do at this point is recognize which of the 8 patterns it is. And you can see down at the bottom of the screen here that all 8 patterns are present. So you just need to look at the 8 and decide which one is the right one. For now, you don't have to do any punctuation. I just want you to be able to recognize the patterns. You'll start the punctuation piece a little bit later. That's in your practice handouts. So, the students were excited to start Of Mice and Men, so they worked particularly hard on the punctuation practice. 10 seconds. Make a decision. Pause the video if you need to. All right. This one is ICCCIC. That was correct. ICCCIC. You should notice that so here is a coordinating conjunction. And so therefore that is this pattern. And also both of the clauses on each side of the so are independent clauses, which you could check to confirm that that's the right pattern. And we'll here, the Dursleys consistently treat Harry badly. However, they get their just desserts on plenty of occasions. 10 seconds, choose the right pattern. If you're in the Edpuzzle version, you'll have a multiple choice question coming up here. If you're not, you can just do it on scratch paper. This one is IC, ICM, IC. From the to badly is an independent clause. However, is the H in the can anyone find Herbert my noisy turtle list, and they to occasions is another independent clause. So even if you weren't sure what however was, you could check both of the other, you can check the other 2 clauses and look, and at least for now, look at the punctuation to get a sense of what it should be there. You really do need to memorize these 2 lists, though, the coordinated conjunctions and the noisy turtle list, because eventually you will have to look at a sentence like this without any punctuation, recognize its pattern, and then add the punctuation. I insist that whoever has not read all the Harry Potter books do so at once. Ten seconds. This one is IEEC. So whoever has not read all the Harry Potter books, if you try to take that out, you end up with I insist that do so at once, which doesn't make any sense. That is ungrammatical. So whoever has not read all the Harry Potter books is an essential element. IEEC is the only possibility here. I should back up. I want to mention here that you need to make sure you're paying attention for a word like whoever or whichever, because they are the good signals for essential elements. Technically, it is an accurate statement to say that this is an independent clause, because it is an independent clause, but it's a special kind of independent clause. That is one that has an essential element within it. So if you on a quiz were to mark this IC instead of IEEC, I would consider it incorrect. You need to recognize that there's an essential element within this independent clause. It's a special independent clause. Even though Carla was very busy, she planned to reread all the Harry Potter books. 10 seconds. This is DC, IC. So even though is the dependent clause marker, everything before that comma there from even to busy is a dependent clause, DC, and because it can't be a sentence by itself, but she planned to reread all the Harry Potter books is definitely an independent clause. So DC, comma, IC. 10 seconds on this one. This one is ICCCIC. ICCCIC. Again, you should be able to recognize that the first part of this here is an independent clause. We have a so, very much like the first one. So that's the S in fanboys, coordinating conjunction, and then another independent clause afterward. The fact that she is a pronoun, making this entire thing, this independent clause, she listened to the audiobooks in the car instead, not make any sense if you didn't have the first half of the sentence. That doesn't actually matter because grammatically it's complete to say she instead of Carla. Same thing goes with instead. Yeah, you don't really know what the other, like what she would have done instead is, what the first statement is, but it doesn't matter grammatically. So next example. Eight more seconds. That is an independent clause. I see. Independent clause. Five more seconds. I hope you're pausing the video if you need to. Righty, this is DC, comma, IC. Ooh, that says DC. Why does that say DC? That is not correct. It should say DC, comma, IC. I apologize. You should be able to tell here that this is if Dr. Wu, or that if is a dependent clause marker, and then from Dr. Wu to saying is from if to saying is not a complete sentence by itself, but I doubt anybody can is a complete sentence. So then you need a comma between those because you put the writer of this sentence put the DC first, followed by the IC. Next one. Eight seconds. This one is ICDC. Don't be thrown off by the if, right? I know it's a little teeny word, but if is a dependent clause marker. And so San Francisco may be in big trouble is a sentence by itself. But then if there is a strong earthquake is not. So ICDC. 10 seconds. This one is INEEC. All right, so you could take this piece that's set apart with commas out. 5 old ladies kept yelling at him. That's extra information in the sentence. So INEEC. 12 seconds on this one. This one is ICDC. So when over here is a dependent clause marker. people can get Fortnite limited edition skins. You could put a period there, and that would actually be a complete sentence, but that's not true of the rest of the sentence, when to products. So ICDC, and no punctuation required in that sentence. Ten seconds on this one. All right, this one is INEEC. All right, so you could, so it says, or you could take this piece out here in the middle from a game still in its closed beta test stage. And so then the sentence would just read, Escape from Tarkov has risen in popularity. And that's all. All right, so you can take this piece out, doesn't really change the meaning of the sentence. So INEEC. And that extra information about the game has to be set apart with commas because it's a non-essential element. Five more seconds. This one is IEEC. IEEC. Again, we have a whoever. So the school will offer whoever helps with the Stanford parking operation 12 community service hours. So if you try to say the offer will, or the school will offer 12 community service hours, that is actually grammatical, but it doesn't clarify who is getting those 12 community service hours or why they're getting them. The sentence is intended to convey that information. And so if you try to take out the essential element with the whoever, it radically changes the meaning of the sentence. Actually, sort of makes it meaningless. All right, so that concludes the check for understanding. Please complete the practice handouts. If you're not my student, you can make your own copy of practice handouts 4, 5, and 6 by following the link in the description of the YouTube version of this video. But if you're my student, I will probably be asking you to do it on Edpuzzle. You already watched the last video, so you can ignore that little piece. That was this video. At this point, you should be able to just practice this and master it, and then go off into the world and be able to successfully recognize all the pieces you've learned and be able to punctuate sentences that use them. I'll also mention one more thing while I have a chance. It is possible to chain together these sentence frames in such a way that you can, for example, you could end up, for example, having a sentence that is DC, comma, ICDC, comma, IC, comma, CCIC, semicolon, ICM, comma, IC, right? That could be one super long sentence. You'll find that that writers in the throughout the 19th century really liked to do exactly that kind of thing. And yet many of those excruciatingly long, complicated, convoluted sentences are really just the writer taking all these patterns that you just learned and nesting them inside each other and using them one after the other after the other. So if you use this grammar to parse that kind of writing, it can actually really help you with reading as well. All right, that's all I have. Thank you.